been talking about humility. And if you remember last week, I was talking to you guys about how in my teen years I struggled a bit because of some attitudes that I had within me. And it's really important that if we're going to succeed, the Lord talks to people. Actually, if you have a look at the Ten Commandments, even though as Christians we're not under the Ten Commandments, the first commandment that God talks about is honouring Him. Now, what does honour mean? Well, that's a funny word. It's something we probably wouldn't use nowadays, but it's very interesting that in the Bible talks about honour as being really important. And what it is actually placing value on something. Now, over in Psalm 8, the Lord said that He honoured humanity by making Him the crown of His creation. So you remember that, how long did it take to make the whole earth? Can you remember?
6 days?
I think, 6 days. And the evening of the sixth day, what happened?
He had a
Can you
rest.
remember? Who was made on number 6 day?
Humans?
Yeah, humans were made on number 6. So God created the whole earth. So if we have a look at it, it's really a great pattern because it talks about how He really cared for you guys. And He took really probably five days to create a home. Now, I happen to know that you guys have been looking at some new structures, and I was invited yesterday to go and have a look with some of my grandchildren at a new premises. And we don't know whether they're, at the moment, they were just looking, but I went and had a look and I could see that my grandchildren were really interested in their home because they were saying, this is my room and that's your room. As a matter of fact, I think the last statement I heard from one of my grandchildren is, I think he was saying this to his older brother, which I knew he was joking about. He said, "You can live in the vacuum cleaner," which I thought was pretty out there, because there's not a lot of room in a vacuum cleaner. But
Not there either.
In the cupboard.
it was in the cupboard. So there were no, Jake. Well, we're not going to use any names, are we, Jake? So, but it's pretty interesting. I'm sure when I was a lad that I used to say those kind of things to my big brothers as well, just to keep them in their place, So, but it's pretty interesting that God honoured us, and what you can tell that He honoured us, and we use the word honour for value, all right? So God honoured humanity, and He spent 5 days creating this beautiful home so that man could enjoy it. But it wasn't just a home where a man was going to sit around and, like you have those visions of heaven. I don't know whether you've ever seen cartoons or whatever, and people are floating around on clouds and they're doing all sorts of, non-work things. Everyone says, oh, it'd be great to go to heaven. But I find that, one of the fears that I had about going to heaven was that I was going to be bored. Because, who wants to really float around? It's okay floating around clouds for, 5 minutes, but after that, what are we going to do? And so, of course, you have traditions that actually stop God's word. So heaven's not like that at all. As a matter of fact, you can see that from people have visited heaven, and you realise that heaven, of course, is very much like the earth. And what's going to happen is that God really made man so that He could, in the end, come and move into the earth. Now, I had no idea of that when I was growing up. I didn't realise that God had a plan. So what He wanted was, He wanted Adam to come down and take some responsibility. So He was creating a family. Now, it's very interesting. This morning we were talking about humility in the family. And the Bible talks a lot about humility in the family, or we could say that to honour someone or to give someone value, you have to have humility. And we talked about Absalom this morning, didn't we? Oh, we didn't talk about it. We looked at it. And what was Absalom's big problem? Yeah, Jake?
He had long hair.
That was his problem. Yeah, no, his problem was that he had really long hair. But really, I don't think that was his problem. It did become a bit of a problem in that he got stuck in a tree. But there was a big problem before we saw him stuck in the tree with his long hair. So God's not against long hair, and he's not against makeup, and he's not against, how we dress. What he's against really is, can anyone remember what he was against?
Pride.
Yeah, pride. Thanks, Pete. And that was a really long stretch out there. I know you're being humble as you're saying, which you didn't want to go on. So pride was the problem with Absalom. It wasn't his hair, it was the fact that he thought in himself that he was worth a whole lot more because of his hairdo. Now, I know this is going to shock you, but when I'm not going to say the age because it was somewhere around 15. Somewhere around the age of 15, I found myself taking extra care with my hair. And what I did, we saw this guy. I mean, how old do you think he was? He was taking a lot of care with his hair, 15 minutes every day to groom himself. So I, at the age of 15, 16 and then 17, now it just so happened that my sister became a hairdresser. And of course, not that I was proud, but wanting to look my best at school for certain did I say that? For the certain people, I thought that I was made because I had an in-house hairdresser. I'm sure that Absalom probably had the same thing because he was kings. Anyway, so what am I saying? Well, I thought if I could get to look good on the outside, remember last week I was talking about, what are you laughing at? You think, oh, Dad, Pop, you would have needed a lot of help. I see it. So what I did was I thought if I could look good on the outside, that would make me feel better on the inside. It's funny, it really didn't. You see, I thought it was going to take away all my insecurities. And if I looked cool enough, that somehow it would make me change on the inside. The only problem was that I went through many changes in my hairdo. I had it really short and buffy, and then later on I had an afro and a moustache, so I looked like one of those disco kings, So, but then finally I thought, I want long hair. The only problem was that my hair was curly, and I thought I'm going to grow it out. But the only problem is, as I said, it grew out like that. And so my sister, because she was a student hairdresser, she said, "Oh, Pete, I can fix that." And she got some perming solution. And perming solution, usually you would use that to make straight hair curly. But she said, "Don't worry, I can make your curly hair straight." And so I let her use this perming solution. And of course, I'm thinking, well, I'm going to look hot after this. There is no woman, I was a bit like Absalom, no woman that could resist this babe, because, as Absalom was, I was perfect, apart from my hair, from the top of my head to the soles of my feet.
No.
You might have thought, did I have a problem with humility? I may have. Anyway, so long and short of it, I said, "Lynn, yes, let's go for it." So my sister had actually experimented on my big brother, and his hair wasn't as curly as mine, and he ended up having long flowing hair, a bit like Absalom, really. If we cut it, it probably would have been 5 pounds of flour. It looked fantastic, as the fan, blew, his hair would, flood, just like you see on the telly. And anyway, so I'm thinking, wow, I'm going to look better than him, because, he was okay, but remember, I was good from to the bottom of my feet. So I think if I can get this hair thing fixed up, it's going to fix up the problems inside of me. So anyway, I let my sister put perming solution on, and after we'd done that, hair got dried. Bit of a problem. My hair was. My hair was kind of straight, but it was kind of straight out like that. and so tragically, it was straight, but it was kind of straight and strawy. And I don't know, have you guys ever seen Wurzel Gummidge? Wurzel Gummidge was a scarecrow, and he had strawy hair. And the big hairdo, talk about a bad hair day, that was my bad hair day. And it didn't fix the problem. But really, essentially, what was happening was I was trying to improve my image. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. So I didn't realise that my image came from inside. You see, what was I trying to do? Well, I was trying to change my image from the outside in, you see. And I remember I said I had some problems when I was a teenager because I had an attitude that people needed, or owed me things. I was saying that last week if you were here. And it was a sense of entitlement, you see, and that entitlement that people needed to be friends with me. See, I didn't want to be friends with people. I wanted people to be friends with me. And so we call that in the Bible, well, it's probably not in the Bible, but we call that entitlement. But that's another form of pride. That's saying, well, listen, you need to be good to me and then I'll be good to you, you see. And God doesn't work like that. God works by faith. And faith is faith is essentially saying what God says about you. You see, God says some stuff in here, and real humility is saying, well, listen, I'm not going to make up, we actually heard that this morning, I'm not going to make up my own mind about how things are. Now, I remember growing up as a teenager, and I hadn't had much word. I didn't realise that, people said God loved me, but I really didn't believe it. And that kind of reflected. And so, I was insecure, and I was demanding that everyone else love me. You see what I'm saying? But the way the kingdom works, see, it's interesting, the kingdom of God, or really the success in your life will be determined by whether or not you listen to God. You see, God, I remember someone talking about, you might have had this too, have you ever got a toy, or, perhaps, I know other older people would have got implements for their kitchen or perhaps their car, and generally what happens is that you get an instruction manual with whatever you get. You might have had a toy, and what do we generally do with the instruction manual when we get something? Yeah, what do? Well, we chuck it over there, and then what do? Well, we say, well, let's see if we can work this out ourselves. And essentially, that's what I was doing in my teenage years. I kind of chucked the instruction manual. Now, I didn't have a great coach in essence, but I didn't listen to my heart, which was really in tune with God, because I was a born again person. I asked Jesus into my life, but I was ignoring him, and I was making up my own rules. And I thought if I could get good enough on the outside, that people would accept me, you see. But I didn't realise that the lack of acceptance really was coming from on the inside of me. You see, there was a lot of, if you like, that rejection on the inside of me was actually, it was demanding that people pay up. Demanding that people accept me, and then if they accept me, then I'd accept them. But it's funny, because there were people that accepted me, but I wasn't interested in them. Isn't that funny? So there were people who gave me their recognition, kind of, but I wasn't really that interested in them. You see, once people gave me their recognition, what would I do? well, I'd move on to someone else who wasn't giving their recognition to me. You see that? So it was pretty peculiar. So what am I saying? Well, the problem of my image was something that couldn't be filled by physical things. You see, I wasn't going to change my appeal to people through dressing nicely. See, you could dress. I've met some people who are really cool on the outside, and as soon as they open their mouth, I don't ever want to see them again. So what am I saying? Well, once they opened their mouth, I found out that they were, okay guys, once they opened their mouth, I could find out what was on the inside. Now it's very interesting that's what the Bible says. It says you can tell what a person's like by just listening to what they say. So that means whatever's on the inside of you will come out of your mouth. That's interesting, isn't it? So, you can dress nicely, but if you've got bitterness and anger and issues on the inside, I'm gonna know that. And so this was exactly how I was. I had anger and issues on the inside of me, and I was demanding that people be nice to me. But what didn't I want to do, Belle?
Be nice to them.
That's exactly right. See, I wanted them to be nice to me first, and then I'd be nice to them, you see. But the problem with that is that that's not how God's kingdom operates. And really, it's not how you honour people. See, honour is valuing people. You see, that's what we were talking about before. When you honour people, you value them, you see. So if I honour my parents, now when I was younger, I didn't honour my parents. What was I saying? Jake, where are you? What was I saying about my parents when I didn't honour them? That's all right, okay. So anyone else? What was I? Yes.
They weren't worth anything.
They weren't worth anything, you see. And so I went around with a chip on my shoulder, and I was angry because I was always wanting people to pay. And when my parents, it didn't matter how much my parents did. Now, if you talk to my sister, she would say that I was the spoilt child in the family. She'd say, I can't believe it, Peter. Mum and Dad would stop milking, they'd run you to basketball, they'd do all these kind of things. You were just, and of course, I expected them to do that. I mean, every parent should, worship their children, shouldn't they? And stop what they're doing and just go and do what they're kids. See, so I had this kind of attitude on the inside, and if my sister Lynn was here, she'd be able to tell you what a revolting child I was. She would be shouting amen, So, and for a long time, what happened was that didn't change. Actually, as a matter of fact, as I grew older, my image grew worse, and I just became more and more bitter. Now, what's the word bitter mean? Like, hand up those who've ever eaten a nice juicy apple. Yes, we've all, well, you should, if you haven't, you should be. And hand up those who've eaten a lovely, nice sweet banana. Yes, we've all done that. Well, some of us have. And then hand up those that have ever taken a big bite of a lemon. How did that go for you? Hey, you love that, did you, Belle? So I have taken a bite of a lemon, and the problem with biting a lemon is that you can't bite it for too long because you go like that. Well, that's how I found it anyway. So now, here's the thing, I can put lemon on pancakes, you probably have done that too, and then what I'll do is I'll whack sugar on top, and then suddenly that lemon is beautiful, and I love lemon on pancakes. But without the sugar, it's bitter and horrible. Now, what I'm trying to say is, guys, that's how I was without the sugar when people met me. They were meeting bitterness, you see. As a young guy, I was bitter, and what happened was I thought, you think that bitterness is going to go away? You see, I thought if I could look better, if I could get better things, if I could somehow surround myself with good stuff, that would make me attractive. However, what I found was that it didn't change who I was at all. It actually made me feel worse. And it wasn't until later in life I started to realise this thing about honour. Yeah, actually the Lord showed me that. He started to talk to me about honouring people. Now the problem with people who have no honour in their life is that they don't value people. You see, now the Bible's really specific. It talks about how children should honour their parents. Now, I'm not going to ask you to put your hand up if you're a kid, because that narrows it down. But it's very interesting. It doesn't stop there, so don't worry, guys. If you're a kid, it doesn't stop there. So we could say this: kids value your parents. And did I value my parents? My sister would say, Pete, you were the most selfish person I'd ever met. Besides, herself. No, she was amazing. She would go and milk cows. She'd do everything for my parents. But I, on the other hand, would do nothing. I would just go and, why? Because I thought I was entitled, to go and get driven to basketball. I was entitled. So this was the attitude I had, you see, and it just didn't stop. And as I grew older, I thought it was going to solve my problems. Getting older, it didn't. It actually made it worse. And I got more bitter and more bitter. And people I found weren't paying me. You see? So I thought, and so what I do sometimes is I would throw tantrums. I would reject people and expect them to pay me, you see. So like for instance, if a young lady didn't think I was any good, and I was telling you about that last week, what did I do? I gave them the silent treatment. I made them run after me. And sometimes that worked, and sometimes they just weren't interested at all. And of course, if they're not interested at all, the only alternative is to start running after them. And generally that's what I did. and then they give me the silent treatment. It just worked like that. So what am I saying? Well, I thought that changing the way I appeared on the outside would deal with these issues and make me more attractive to people. But what wasn't I changing, guys? What wasn't I changing? I wasn't changing on the inside. I wasn't changing my heart, you see. And even though I might have looked nice, I couldn't understand because, you would think that if you look smashing and you had a nice car and all that kind of stuff, that somehow that would affect people's image of you. But the problem was eventually I opened my mouth, and it was like someone experiencing biting a lemon, you see, because all the bitterness, it didn't matter about the outside, all the bitterness was on the inside of me. And when I spoke, what came out? Well, all the juice of the lemon came out. All the bitterness in my life came out, and people aren't attracted to bitterness. They might be because they need your acceptance, and they might be for a little while, but eventually I noticed that people got a bit over that, you see, and you'll find that your friends very quickly will get over bitterness. Now you can start to look cool and you can do all that kind of stuff, but the problem is eventually people want to be valued. You see, they'll want you to value them. And I found that when I started to change my mind about valuing people, that I actually became more attractive. Isn't that interesting? So initially when I was a child, when I was childish, when I was a teenager, when I grew up even more than that, I thought it was the outside of me that made me attractive. But God doesn't say that at all. He says that the inner man is the attractive part of you. And so a lot of people, what they do is they go through life and they never even develop their inner man, or they never ever try to change on the inside. Now, I found that when I got full of, remember we were talking about the instruction manual? what do we generally do with the instruction manual? We chuck it away, don't we? And then when we can't do stuff, what do? When things aren't working, sometimes we have to go and fish it out of the bin and start to follow the plans. Well, that's what I did. What you see, I started to listen to God's instruction manual. So why did God for 5 days create the whole earth? What was it all about? It was all about honouring man. You see, he valued man. He created man. He was a dad. It says that God was Adam's dad, you see. And so what was he doing? Well, he was creating a home for this person Adam. Yeah, it's really interesting because as you go through in Genesis, we won't do it now, but God goes through and he looks at his creation. He looked at the land and then he looked at the sea and he said, "Oh, gee, that's good." He wasn't being proud. He was just looking at it and he was saying, "Well, that's really good." Actually, he didn't say that. He said, "It's good, it's good, it's good." He looked at man and he said, "It's really good." You see, so when he got to the stage, so when he got to the stage of looking at man, he said, "Well, this is terrific." But then he said something really peculiar. He said, "Oh, that's not good." So that's pretty peculiar. And he said, "Oh, man's good." And then said, "This is not good." And what he was saying was, it's not good that man be alone. Now, if you have a look at the word alone, it's a pretty interesting word because it's broken up and it's really 2 words and it's joined together. So what would those 2 words be, you smarties? What are you thinking?
All one.
All one. Oh, someone's been listening to something, haven't they? Oh no, I just discerned that. Hey, that's my gift of suspicion. Yes, it means all one. That no, it wasn't you, Pete. Oh, you look at him. Oh, thank you, Jesus. It was me. Well, we know what one. We're having a collection next week before we start. Anyway. All one, yeah. So we're talking about God looked at man and he said, "Oh, it's not good that they're all one. It's not good that Adam's on his own." And so we understand that essentially God is into not being all one or not being, what's the word? Alone. God doesn't want you to be alone. Now, what was I talking about? I was talking about my teenage years and guys, even though I dressed myself up on the outside, I was still all one. I was still alone. You see, I was looking for people to come in my life. Actually, I was looking for someone to come in and take responsibility for my friendships. You see, ever been like that where you think, oh, everyone else should take responsibility for you? And that's exactly how I was. And really that's selfishness, guys. If you want to trace it back, it's you wanting someone to do something for you. And so the big change in my life came when I stopped looking at the outside of myself, which we found out from our study of Absalom, was essentially, what was that word they used? When you're looking at your outside and you're thinking that you're above everyone else. What's that word? It's called, yes, come on, lies.
Pride.
It's called pride, isn't it? Yes, no one was wanting to put up their hand. They were all... No, I shouldn't. I don't know where I get it. Yes, so looking at the outside generally is about pride. Do you know that the person who originated pride was called Lucifer? And Lucifer was God's, if you like, right-hand man. He wasn't a right-hand man, he was a right-hand angel. But it says about Lucifer that he was so beautiful that, this is the problem, he was like me when I was young, he fell in love with himself. What do we know about... Don't look at me like that, Pete. You say, I already knew that problem. I'll swap him later. Hey, there's a lot of people who are thinking, yeah, over there too. All right, okay. So,
You need to say it.
oh, anyway. So, what do we find out about Absalom? Who was he in love with most?
Himself.
Himself, that's right. And how do we know that? Well, it's by the way he treated people. What did he get them to do, Belle? Every time they came to the city gate, can you remember?
You made them like kiss his head or something.
That's exactly right. He was downgrading his father's worth, who was king at the moment. You got to watch that. And when someone's starting to downgrade the boss's worth, you stay away from those people. Or a teacher's worth, or another friend's worth. You got to watch that. When someone starts bagging out a bud, hey, step away from that. You know, because these things influence you. So pride is a terrible thing. And this is what happened to Lucifer. He was the originator of pride. He fell in love with himself. God kept giving him really good things. He just kept lavishing wonderful things on this angel. And this angel was in charge of a lot, we'll call them people, a lot of other angels. And he got the big head. And he thought, well, listen, he was like Absalom. He thought, I can take over. I think I might take over heaven. Big mistake. Because he didn't take over heaven. He got kicked out of heaven. You see? Pride's a terrible thing, guys, because it promises that you're going to get somewhere by devaluing others and valuing who? Yourself more. That's right. So that's what pride does. Proud people don't make great friends. Why? Because they're not going to value you. They play like they do because they're using you. You've got to watch this too. Guys and girls, be very careful about the partners you choose. Make sure that they are not proud people because they are going to use you. Now, that's what I was saying. When I was younger, I was a very proud person. I didn't value you. The only way I value you is if I could use you as my stepladder to go somewhere. And I remember I was talking about that. And I thought that if I could get further up the ladder, that it would change how I felt about myself on the inside. As a matter of fact, using people doesn't make you feel good about yourself at all. As a matter of fact, it'll make you feel pretty hollow inside. And I got more and more, what's the word? Lonely. Because I wasn't making friends, I was using friends. And we don't call them friends, they were just people that I thought could build me. So you've got to be very careful to honour people. God talks about this. This is a very, very important thing in God's kingdom. It's the way the kingdom of God operates. It's by honouring people or valuing people. You see? And so the first commandment, now, if you look at the Ten Commandments, it's very interesting. Now, we don't live by the Ten Commandments because we've got them on the inside of us as Christians. The Jews had to live like that. But it's interesting the way God sets it out. The first 4 commandments are about God. And then the next 6 are about people. Now, the number 1 commandment is honour God. Isn't that interesting? So it's a bit like this. God created you as a person. He loved you. Before you were even born, he was thinking about you. And he wanted you as his child, you see. So, and he's already prepared lots and lots of stuff for you. And the more humble you are, this is tricky. The more humble you are, the more he's able to give stuff to you. Do you know what it's, in the Bible, I think it's around Numbers chapter 12, you can check me out. Do you know what it says about Moses? Now Moses was an interesting guy. He was in charge of all Egypt. He was an Israelite, but he got to a stage where he's in charge of all of Egypt and he could do what he wants. What he wanted. You see, kings have got those kind of choices. If they want to buy a Ferrari, what do? They buy a Ferrari. You see, they do whatever. But Moses, it says of Moses that in all the earth, and there must have been a fair few people because there's about 3 million Israelites. And there are all the Egyptians, that's what we know from the Bible. But we're talking all the, he was the most humble man. The most humble man. Do you know who God used most on the earth at that stage? It was Moses. You see, so the more humble we are, the more we value God and others, the more we can be used to help God's kingdom. You see, humility is about God's kingdom and pride is about whose kingdom? Satan's. And now, you know, he's called Satan now, but he was Lucifer, you see. So the thing about Lucifer was he was exactly the same as Absalom. Do you know what he said to all the angels? He said, oh, mate, if I was God, you wouldn't have to have this, you know, you wouldn't have to sweep the floors of heaven. You know, I'll be looking after you. I'd get you a vacuum cleaner. Hey? You know, so that's how he operated. It says he was a trafficker. Now that's an old English word for someone who sidled up to people. Pardon me, sidled up to people and kind of con them. You know, you've heard of con artists. You know, that's what they do. He'd traffic people. He'd sidle up and say, "Look, I reckon I could do you a better deal." And he was pretending that he valued them more than God, you see. And that's how he operated. That's how, and how many many angels did he draw after him? Anyone know? A third of the angels followed him. So they were seduced. Seduced, that's a funny word, isn't it? Seduction. Seduction's where people trick you. Generally it's by looking good or promising something that you're going to get. You know, you hear about people being seduced into business deals all the time. This is going to be the best business deal ever, and they lose all their family fortune. That kind of stuff. You right, Dust, there's some tissues over there, sweetie. Just round under the roller door. It's not just for those people online. Someone's crying because of the message. No, they're not. Thanks, Judge, if you could do that, that'd be terrific. So what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about the nature of humility. You see, God, we talked about the 10 Commandments. You know, the first 4 commandments about honouring God. Well, what's the bit of itchy there? So when we say honour God, what are we saying? Valuing God. See, if you value God, what are you going to put? How are you going to treat him in your life? It says honour God, and so what you would do is you will put him as first value, and that's what he wants. Remember, God talked to Adam. He said, "Adam, I've got this garden for you, but what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to what? Anyone? Eat. Very good. Eat the apple. We're not sure it was an apple tree. Might have been a lemon tree. Yes, that's right, Belle. He said, don't eat the apple. Now, what was he saying? Was he being mean? Was he saying, well, I don't know, that's not. What was he? What he was saying is, guys, I want you to honour me. I want you to honour me. So that means that here's all of yours. You've got all this garden I've made you, but there's one thing that I don't want you to touch. And that is really essentially, I want to teach you to honour me. Now, what do we find that Adam did? And it was really Eve as well. What did she do? Yes?
He ate the apple.
That's right. Omar. So so the problem wasn't the apple, it was the dishonour. It was Adam and Eve saying, we just don't value you, God. Now, it's very funny that the apple or the tree is kind of exactly the same as where God talks about the tithe in Malachi. You see this pattern where God says, you can have all this, but what I want you to do is I want you to not touch this. And over in Leviticus, I think it's around chapter 26, it talks about the tithe, and it says the tithe is the Lord's. Now, what's a tithe? You guys probably would know that, but there's some people that wouldn't know. Well, the word tithe really means tenth. And so every year the Israelites would have to bring a tenth of what they had earned, you see, and they brought it to God. And it was part of the law, but what was God trying to institute with it? He was trying to institute honour. You see, he wanted them to honour him. And he said, if you honour me, what will happen is that, and remember what we talked about honour? Honour is the way the kingdom of God operates. So what was God trying to do? He was trying to bring his kingdom into the garden. You see, and once they failed in the garden, he still tried to get men to honour him. The nation of Israel, he wanted the nation of Israel to honour through the tithe. You see, you can have all this, but don't touch this. And he said, when you honour me, I'll honour you. Isn't that interesting? So when we honour God, what does God say? Well, it says, things are going to go well for you. Now, it doesn't stop. We're talking about the Ten Commandments. I've got about 5 minutes, so I'm going to wrap it up in about 5 minutes. But the next commandment, which is, well, they're all important, but that on number 6, I don't know, what is it? I think it's number 6. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, number 5 must be. It says in the law, it says, children, honour your parents, honour your father and mother. Now, why would God want us to honour? What did I say I didn't do when I was younger? I didn't honour my father and mother. I didn't have any value for them, apart from the fact that they would get me to basketball. That's what I was saying. See, I didn't care about that. Who did I care about? Oh, I cared about the fact that I was going to get and play with my mates and get some recognition from my mates. You see, I didn't care the fact that they had to stop milking. They had to fill up the car and travel, about, how many kilometres? About 50 kilometres to go and get me to a basketball game. And then when I'd come home, I wouldn't say what? I wouldn't say thank you, very good, Belle, because there was no honour in me. You see, saying thank you is important because it shows me that you honour people. Have you ever met someone that doesn't say thank you? You may have. Have you ever been? No, we'll go answer that one. Have you ever been a person that doesn't say thank you? Well, not after today, Pop. Dad, Pastor Pete. We're all going to say thank you from now on. Very interesting that on first of all, he says honour God. The next thing he starts dealing with people, the first thing he says, guys, is honour who? Honour mum and dad. Why? Why would he say that? Now, here's the thing. You may have had some problems with your mum and dad. They may not have been very faithful to you. They may not have been, but here's the thing, God doesn't say whether they've been faithful, whether they've been nice to you, whether they've been grumpy at you, all that kind of stuff. He just says, honour mum and dad. Why? Because when you honour mum and dad, he said, your life's going to go well for you. That's interesting, isn't it? Financially, when we honour God, he said things will go well for you. He says that when you honour your mum and dad, because if you think about it, you wouldn't be here if it wasn't for mum and dad. I know, it's painful to say. Mum and dad were the originators of you. God used your mum and dad to create you. And it's because of that he wants you to honour them. You see? Honour is placing value on them. Now, they may be grumpy, they may be, I was talking to someone the other day, they said someone was very unfair. And I was saying, well, in spite of that, I know they may have been unfair, you're going to have to make a decision to go above that unfairness and still honour them. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to you have to stay with unfaithful people, but you need to honour them. You see? So that means you need to place value on mum and dad, even though perhaps they haven't done the right thing. And God said, if you do that, then I'll place on you. Now, very interesting, I was listening to a song the other day. It's by Mike and the Mechanics. Everyone knows that song. But it's a really amazing song. It talks about, it says, every generation blames the one before. Isn't that interesting? Every generation blames the one before. So what are they saying? Well, all my problems are because of you. You see? Therefore, I won't value you. But that's really against God's value system. God says if you can value mum and dad, that's a very basic building block for the rest of your life. You see? So if you think back in your life and you've had problems, go back and see whether you've honoured mum and dad. The basic building block for your success in life, God says, it's the only commandment with that kind of promise. Isn't that interesting? And then in the New Testament, Paul repeats it in Ephesians. He says, it's honour your mother and father, which is the first commandment with promise that things may go well with you. And I am here to testify, things didn't go very well with me when I didn't honour my mum and dad. You see, I had some fantastic jobs. Isn't that interesting? Had some fantastic jobs. Got some great opportunities. But because of the bitterness in my heart towards my mum and dad, I didn't value those things. Isn't that interesting? So the value that I put on mum and dad bled, if you like, into my personality. So I didn't value mum and dad, therefore they were the basic building block. I didn't value anyone else. And so God had to teach me to go back and start with his basic building block. Number one, honour him. And how did I honour him? What did I have to start doing? I had to start tithing. You see, I had to start honouring him and say, well, in my life, the tithe really, which was giving the first part of my income to God, that changed my life, guys. That changed my perspective on economics. Now what I'm doing is a tithe is a tenth. Now I'm trying to get to a point where I can honour the Father with 30%. 30% of my income I want to give to him. Well, it's really not giving, but essentially I want to honour him more and more. See, now here's the thing, I want to honour my mum and dad. Now my mum has passed on, my dad's still, he's over in a nursing home, and so what I do is I go and visit him. And the reason I go and visit him is because I want to honour him, you see. And what that does is that changes me on the inside, you see. At one time in my life, I thought I tried to run away from my father. I didn't want to be with him. I didn't want to be around him because of certain judgments that I had in my life. And then what had to happen was that God had to deal with me. If I was going to succeed in the rest of my life, I had to get to a point where I could honour my dad. And through a lot of circumstances, I ended up having to look after him when he got sick. And so that changed my attitude. I was the only one that could do that at that stage. And I had to go and look after him, even though I didn't want to. Even though I didn't want. And what's that? Well, that's showing honour to my father. And it's funny because all that bitterness that I had towards my parents started to disappear when I started sowing or giving my life to him. All that bitterness and anger that had been there since I was a little boy, 16, little boy, no, it was there before that too. But all the anger and that, when I started serving my dad, it started to disappear. And things started to go well with me. Praise the Lord. For a start, I could, I was saying to one of my sons the other day, I I went over the other day, you know, I couldn't stop hugging and kissing him. I mean, that was never on the agenda when I was younger. I mean, stabbing and murdering him was. Burning his house down, may have been. But what had happened? Well, things had changed, you know. So what happened was that when I started loving him or serving him or placing value on him, my heart started to change. That's pretty interesting, guys. So if you want to change your life around, I mean, it's great to look good on the outside, don't get me wrong. Great to look nice on the outside. Do your best. If your barn needs painting, paint your barn, you know, that kind of thing. So, but here's the thing, that's not going to change who you are on the inside. It's not going to change you from a lemon to an apple. You know, when people take a bite of you, they do this, you know. That's probably because you've got bitterness in your life. No one wants to be around bitter people. I don't. So when you start to say, this is what changed my life, I started giving my life away, things started to change. I actually started to honour people. God said to love people. It's the same as saying honour people. Value them. You see, the thing is, you're going to get busy. Going to the supermarket the other day. How do I value people? Well, I listen to them. I don't, you know, I like what one pastor said. He said, most people are, you know, they're waiting for you to stop talking and they've got both their barrels loaded so that when you stop, what are they going to do? They're going to start. They haven't listened to words you said, they're just after a gap. That's not honouring people. That's not valuing people. Valuing people is listening to people. When my grandkids come up and tell me about their wonderful achievements, I say, well, that's nice, but have a listen to mine. That's not valuing my grandkids, or my children, or my church members. So most of my time, guys, this is pretty interesting. Do you know what most of my time involves? Listening to people, valuing people. That's most of what I do in my, if you're like pastoring capacity. Most of the time I am giving value to people by listening to what they're interested in. That changed my life when I started sowing instead of trying to get. Well, here endeth the lesson for today, guys. I've gone a little bit over, so apologise for that. Been really wonderful to be able to preach. For those guys online, we apologise for our little abrupt start and our vocals. Hopefully when we get that on edited, we'll fix up any vocal problems. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time, guys. No, we won't see you next week. At all, yeah. No, so no church next week. I've been called on a missionary journey over to, should I say, yes, it's a Christmas party. I've got to go over and play for a Christmas party, and I won't be back in time to have church. So I apologise for that. But the next week, what's that sign of relief? I'm watching. Yeah, so the next week after that, we'll be having church. Yes, you're in trouble. Hey?
Is it at the stage?
No, it's not at the stage. We've had to cancel our booking at the stage. So it will be back at 20 Duke Street. So for all those people, and online here. Yeah. So we'll see you next time, guys. Thanks very much.